Joining me now is Peter Schiff. He's an American financial analyst, stockbroker, and author. He correctly warned about the collapses in the housing and financial markets that led up to the financial crisis of 2007-2008. He's also the CEO and chief global strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital. He joins us now to talk about the state of the global economy. Peter, welcome to the Next News Network.
Oh, thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. Now, Peter, some fear that there is a bank storm on the horizon based on an unsustainable calm. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, I do think that the current situation globally, and particularly in the United States, is extremely unstable. And I think that we are, in fact, in not just the lull before a storm, but probably more of the eye of a financial hurricane. You know, a lot of people believe that the problems were solved, that the crisis of 08, 09, was abated, that the policies of the central bankers saved us from what could have been something even more horrific. But the reality is that the central bankers actually made all the problems worse. They caused the problems. They inflated the bubble that ultimately popped. The market tried to fix the problem. That's why we had the financial crisis. It was the market's attempt to correct all the mistakes that the bankers had made. And rather than allowing that correction to run its course, which would have been very healthy and constructive, the central bankers, particularly the Fed, intervened. And now I think we're in a much worse financial position than we were in 8 years ago. And unfortunately, I think the economic crisis that lies ahead is going to be much more profound and impact people in a much bigger way than did the crisis of 08.
So do you think that Chase Bank now is hip to that because they've recently imposed new restrictions on cash withdrawals from ATMs after updating their technology? And you've probably heard about this one instance, a customer pulled out $20,000 at one ATM withdrawal. Are they afraid of an uncontrolled bank run based on people's fears of what the global economy is doing?
I have no idea if they're cognizant of this or worried about it or not. I mean, they should be. Although I think the problem isn't necessarily going to be bank runs. I think that people will be able to get their money out. The question is, what will it buy them? That's going to be the big problem. It's going to be a big collapse in the value, particularly of the dollar. And so prices are going to go up a lot. So your money's still going to be at the bank, but it's not going to do you much good when you try to spend it because the prices are going to be a lot higher.
So let's talk about the GDP. Do you believe that it's indicating that we're looking towards a recession?
Well, yeah, I think we're probably already in a recession. As much as the political powers that be and the Wall Street establishment and the Fed certainly want to deny what should be painfully obvious, I think we're already in a recession. The GDP numbers don't necessarily confirm that yet. The estimate right now for the first quarter GDP is for growth of 0.4. That's the official estimate from the Atlanta Fed, 0.4. I mean, that's very close to zero. But I think that by the time we get the actual number, it will be a negative number. And I think the economy is contracting. I mean, it feels like it's contracting. That's why you've got so much support for candidates like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. These voters know that the economy is in much worse shape than the leaders are portraying. And I think, eventually the government's going to have to go back and acknowledge that we are in a recession. I believe it began probably at the end of last year. And it's probably going to continue throughout the entirety of this year. I think the next president is going to inherit an even bigger recession than the one Obama inherited from Bush.
Now, you mentioned Trump, you mentioned Sanders. What is your take on the GOP specifically? I know you ran for Senate as well. You've gone through the ringer there. What do you believe the GOP's angle is with Donald Trump, and we're seeing possibly a contested convention on the horizon?
Well, I think the establishment is certainly afraid of Trump, and that he's not the candidate that they prefer. They don't like Cruz either, which is probably one of the best things about either of those candidates is that the establishment doesn't like them, which means that there's obviously got to be something appealing there if the political elites don't like them. But I think the vein that Trump is tapping into is pretty deep. It's the same vein that Sanders is tapping into from the left, and that is the disgruntled American who's seeing a continuous diminution in his standard of living. The cost of living is going up. His income is going down. Many people who used to be gainfully employed in higher paying full-time jobs now have 2 or 3 part-time jobs, and they're very low-paying jobs, and they don't have any benefits. And they hear President Obama talk about this miraculous recovery, but it's not what they're experiencing in their real lives.
Now, last month, the All News Pipeline warned that major banks were preparing to tighten the screws on American account holders in April. Now, we just mentioned Chase Bank. They're limiting their withdrawals. Do you think that this is going back to that? Do you think it's a contingency plan so negative interest rates can come into effect? That's the big buzzword right now.
Yeah, well, not that many Americans have that much money in the bank anyway. I mean, Americans are broke. I mean, they mainly owe money to the bank. They don't have money sitting on deposit at the bank. It's majorly larger, corporate customers that really have any money there. And yeah, negative interest rates would be very problematic. I mean, they're creating problems in Europe. They're creating problems in Japan. Yet, central bankers are doing it anyway. I mean, none of this is going to work if your goal is economic growth or, employment. The only thing that you accomplish by doing this is to, diminish your currency, debase your currency. And, the euro and the yen are actually rising right now, despite the fact that they have negative rates. And a lot of that is because the dollar is just so weak that even with negative rates, those currencies can rise in relation to the dollar. But they are falling in relation to gold. And I think all the world's currencies are going to fall in terms of gold. And if you're really worried about negative interest rates, you should be owning some gold.
Let's talk about California and New York. Both of them signed legislation on Monday that will push the minimum wage in those states to $15 per hour. Annual hikes will result in the minimum of $15 per hour in January of 2022. Now, that's some time away, but how do you think this is going to affect business and small business in the long term?
Well, the big losers are going to be, number one, the low-wage workers. They're going to be the biggest losers. And then number two will be the consumers in the state of California. Businessmen, they'll be able to survive because everybody's got to deal with these same issues. But for low-skilled workers who are going to see the employment opportunities diminish dramatically, many people in California or New York, if they want to get a job, they're going to have to move to another state, a state that wasn't dumb enough to price them out of the labor market. What's going to happen in states like California and New York is you're going to see a lot of automation that might otherwise not have taken place. I mean, it's always a cost-benefit analysis. And as you raise the cost of labor, the benefit of using machines instead of labor gets greater and greater. And I think they've now pushed up wages so high that automation is going to pay off in a way that it wouldn't have had the government not interfered. So I think you're going to see a lot of, let's say, fast food restaurants that are going to resemble self-serve gas stations. Once upon a time in America, you drove to a gas station and you didn't get out of your car. And 3 or 4 kids came out and somebody pumped your gas, someone checked your oil, someone checked the air on your tires, somebody washed your windows. You had all this service. All those guys are gone. Now you pump your own gas. Why are they gone? The minimum wage made that labor too expensive. Well, pretty soon, fast food restaurants are going to look just like self-serve gas stations. You're going to go into a restaurant. There's not going to be anybody there. You're going to order with a computer. A robot's going to prepare your meal, and you're going to pay with your debit card or your smartphone, and that's going to be it. And, maybe there'll be one attendant at a McDonald's or Burger King, but you're not going to have all these jobs. And so this is very unfortunate for young people who are not going to be able to get their first job. And if you can't get your first job, well, you can't get your second job or your third job. These low-skilled jobs are very important for people to learn responsibility, on-the-job training, to get their foot on the job ladder. Now this is going to be impossible for so many people. Yeah, there's still going to be some people that have these low-skilled jobs, but not the people that have them now. Because if you have to pay $15 an hour, you're going to hire a higher caliber guy than you're hiring right now for maybe $7.50 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is. And, of course, some of these jobs, since you're overpaying, you're going to have a connection to get the job. Maybe you're going to have to, have a relative or, because when you price the market artificially, then you have to have other criteria to get the jobs. They'll go to people that are more attractive physically, that speak English better. I mean, a lot of the people now that have these jobs who are so happy about the $15 minimum wage, they're not going to see a $15 wage. They're going to be unemployed. They're going to see a pink slip long before they ever see a $15 wage. And, of course, the other loser is the consumer, who might prefer to interact with human beings, but now he's going to be interacting with computers. You know, I hate it when I am stuck in a computer voicemail system. I call up a company, and instead of talking to a human being, I'm dealing with a computer. Why is that? Because of government labor laws, minimum wage laws, that make it too expensive to hire human beings, so they use computers instead. I would rather deal with human beings, but I don't have that choice anymore. And I think people are not going to have that choice in California, New York. If you want to go to a low-cost fast food restaurant, there's not going to be any human beings there.
Now, speaking of the job markets, Donald Trump has been very critical of international trade, free trade agreements, and, of course, the trade imbalance with China. He's talking about, you know, the NAFTA jobs going into Mexico. He keeps bringing up different companies that have essentially just say, hey, we're going, we're leaving, thank you very much, we're going to be shipping our stuff back. What is the reality of a Trump presidency and him, you know, creating some deals that are going to bring jobs back to America? Is it realistic?
Well, it's not about deals. I mean, it's not bad negotiation that's the problem, right? We don't have a trade deficit because we have bad negotiators. We have trade deficits because the economy is unproductive. And that's because of our taxes and our regulation. So if Trump wants to turn that situation around, there is no deal he can negotiate unless it's with Congress. What he needs to do is remove all of the regulatory impediments to production in this country. We've got to get rid of government laws like minimum wage laws. But there's a whole bunch of other laws we got to get rid of if we want these jobs back. Because if all we do is impose tariffs, we're not going to get the jobs back. We're actually going to destroy some of the jobs that are still here. All that's going to do is jack up the cost of buying imports. But we're not going to be able to start producing that stuff ourselves because we don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the factories. We don't have the skilled labor force. So I don't even know if Trump intends to do any of this stuff. I mean, this could all be the talking points that he's hitting in order to appeal to the electorate. I mean, look, he says he's pro-life. I mean, the guy's not pro-life. He's pro-choice. I mean, he's always been pro-choice. But, you know, he's running as a Republican, so he pretends he's pro-life. You know, so maybe a lot of the stuff he says about building walls and about imposing tariffs, it's all talk. I don't know. Hopefully it is. Maybe he's actually smart enough to know the difference between what you say to get elected and what you do if you are elected, if his goal really is to make America great again. And I agree with Trump. America is not great. Right? And so if we want to be great again, we're going to have to start doing the things that we used to do that made us great. And that means we have to undo all the things that we did that caused us to lose that greatness. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And, you know, if Trump does get elected, hopefully he'll do it.
Now let's talk about jobs again. As many as 1 million Americans will stop receiving food stamps this year. And that's the consequence of a controversial work mandate that took effect this week in 21 states. Does this come at a bad time when you say that massive layoffs are coming?
Well, I mean, look, I don't think anybody should be getting food stamps. I don't think we should have that program. I don't think the government should be in the welfare business. So if people are going to be pushed off the food stamp rolls, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a positive. But the problem is all the people who are unemployed, who are now, a lot of them are using food stamps, they're unemployed in many cases because of government. So, you know, while I can feel badly that people are in need of food stamps, just providing those food stamps is not the answer. The answer is to allow people to be self-sufficient so that they can earn enough so that they don't need food stamps. And in the meantime, the government is what is imposing all these impediments that is keeping people from acquiring the types of jobs that would allow them, you know, not to need these things. Meanwhile, you know, we have these big farm subsidies, and we pay farmers, huge agricultural businesses, you know, lots of money not to grow food. I mean, the government is trying to keep the price of food artificially high. How about getting the government out of agriculture so that the free market can make food less expensive, so people don't need food stamps as much because food won't be as expensive? So if we have a free market, we won't need any of these programs. And, of course, you know, the few people who actually, you know, can't survive, they can't hold down a job for whatever reason. Maybe they've got some mental incapacity that makes it impossible for them to take care of themselves. Well, that's what you got private charity for. And private charity is a lot more efficient than the welfare state.
Continuing the discussion on jobs now, the United States lost 29,000 manufacturing jobs in March, while gaining jobs in retail trade, food service, and drinking establishments. This is according to data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, Ford Motor plans to build a new $1.6 billion auto assembly plant in Mexico. So what manufacturing jobs are going to be left in America if this trend continues?
Well, none. If the trend continues, there won't be any left unless you want to call making hamburgers manufacturing, although they'll be done by computers rather than human beings. But, you know, when you talk about the jobs that are being created in, let's say, the restaurant industry, there are no real jobs being created. Here's what's happening, and nobody talks about this in the mainstream, but what happens is, let's say I'm a restaurateur, I own a restaurant, and because of government regulations, particularly Obamacare, I made a decision that I don't want any full-time employees. I want all my employees to be part-time because that way I don't fall under these onerous requirements. So now I go to my waiters and bartenders who used to work full-time and I say, hey, you know, you used to work 40 hours a week. You can only work 20. Okay? Now my waiter goes to another restaurant to get a job working part-time for the other 20 hours that I cut back. That's where the jobs are coming from. The new jobs that are being created are people who have to take a second part-time job to make up for their loss of income on their first part-time job. In fact, if you look at the jobs report that we just got last week for March, 60% of the jobs that were created went to people who were already employed, right? So these are people that had one job and now they got a second job. Now, you're not getting a second full-time job. You're getting a second part-time job to augment the part-time job you have. So that's what's happening. There is no net creation of jobs, right? There's a destruction of jobs. We're destroying full-time jobs, and the byproduct of that destruction is the creation of lower-paying part-time jobs. So that's where the government gets the big number, right? Because you need more part-time jobs than full-time jobs because each part-time job pays less and it has fewer hours. But in total, right, Americans are earning less. People earned more when they had one full-time job than when they have two part-time jobs. But the president gets to claim credit for all this job creation because the number of part-time jobs that we create exceeds the number of full-time jobs that we destroy.
In 1956, you bring up a good point. One income could support an entire middle-class family. Now, in 2016, some families are working 2 to 3 jobs to support their family or avoid just being thrown out on the street. How come now, back then, how come one income could support an entire middle-class family, but not today?
Well, we had a lot less government back then. I mean, the government did start growing basically under the New Deal, but, you know, it was still relatively small during that period of time. People didn't really pay income taxes. I mean, the income tax started in 1913 as a, kind of a soak-the-rich tax. But the middle class didn't even start paying the income tax until the Second World War when they came up with the victory tax, which was a withholding tax. But if you look at where the tax brackets, the tax started even in the 1950s, barely any of the money that the average American earned was subject to tax. And the Social Security tax didn't come in until the 1930s, but when it came in initially, it was only 1%. And if you were self-employed, you were exempt from the Social Security tax. You didn't have to pay anything. People got to keep almost all the money that they earned. And so if the government wasn't taking a third or half your paycheck, it was easier for you to support your family. But when the government started taking so much in taxes from people, it was impossible to support your family on what you had left. And so then, your wife had to get a job because, you couldn't afford to support her anymore. And so also, we were a much more productive economy back then because we didn't have all these regulations. So we produced a lot more. And so our labor was a lot more productive. And so it was able to be paid more. In fact, if you look at what people earned back then, I mean, the real earnings are lower now. I mean, nobody wants to discuss this, but this is a reality. And so we actually have a lower standard of living today than we had maybe in the 1950s, despite the fact that we've had technological advancements, which happened despite all this government. But can you imagine the advancements that we would have enjoyed had we not had all this government? Had government stayed small? I mean, you wouldn't even recognize America. I mean, it'd be like a science fiction movie. The standard of living that Americans would enjoy, the things that we would have, it would be like going to another planet. That's how much better off we would be if we had just maintained the limited government that we had 100 years ago, but enable technology to continue to give us ways to improve our lives.
Peter, how do you forecast the next following year? Taking a look at all the trends we have right now, how does 2016 play out in your vision?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough year economically, guys. I think this is the year that we relapse back into recession. Although I think 2017 will be worse than 2016 as far as the economic experience. I don't think it's going to be a good year for the stock market. It may be not going to collapse, but it's not going much higher. But I think the dollar is going to lose a lot of value, and so that's going to reduce the value of U.S. stocks. So I think that people need to brace for some tougher times. I'm advising my clients again to prepare for this. Gold is a good thing to own. Gold stocks. This first quarter of 2016, I think, was the worst quarter in 16 years for actively managed accounts. We had our best quarter at Europe Pacific Capital, I think, since 2009. Everything is now starting to happen that I've been forecasting. I think this is going to continue. So you want to continue to look at gold. You want to look internationally. You want to get out of the dollar. You want to invest in markets like Switzerland or Singapore or New Zealand. Buy good quality stocks outside the United States that provide income in Swiss francs, right, in Singapore dollars, in New Zealand dollars, in currencies that are going to gain as the dollar falls. Because we had this dollar rally the past few years. This is a bubble. It's all based on people not understanding the predicament that we're in, believing the Fed, believing that they've solved our problems, not realizing that they've exacerbated our problems, and we are careening towards a larger financial crisis than 2008. And in fact, this one is going to morph into a currency crisis, and a currency crisis, a dollar crisis, is going to be infinitely worse than a financial crisis.
All right, Peter, where can our viewers go to pick up your newsletter, grab a copy of your newest book?
Well, my latest book, The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. You can get that on Amazon. In fact, it's probably more relevant now than it was a couple years ago when it came out, so I would strongly recommend that people pick up a copy of The Real Crash. You can follow me on my website. You can go to my YouTube channel, the Schiff Report or Schiff Radio for my various podcasts and video blogs. And if you're interested in really doing something to protect yourself while that window is still open, you can contact me at my brokerage firm, Euro Pacific Capital. Our website is europac.net. Or if you're interested in acquiring physical precious metals, I have a gold company, schiffgold.com. And I think gold and foreign investing is probably the most important thing that you can do now to really insulate yourself from what I see coming in the next several years.
All right, Peter, once again, thanks for joining us on the Next News Network, folks.